I already teased that we might discuss a topic where you draw a line or you said no to a certain investment.
Yeah.
And we already explained some criteria that you want to be a Swiss-oriented investor. And there's one question coming from the audience that I found very interesting. And it's also leaning into the influence Buffett has in your portfolio, because some of the ideas you took from him or you used from him. And one idea you didn't use, and mainly Monish also didn't use, was Apple. And at the time, the investment was announced publicly, so you could have gone into the rabbit hole of Apple and followed it. And why didn't you decide to invest in Apple as well at that time, or what held you back there?
Yeah, it's a source of. It's not a source of as much pain as it would have been a few years ago, but. To take you to the history of my knowledge about Apple, somebody that I met at the Berkshire meeting, who's an incredibly private guy, but I think that he won't mind if I bring up his name, is a man called Steve Wallman. Steve lives in Madison, Wisconsin. And in summertime, I believe that Madison, Wisconsin has a lake. He has a summer home on the lake. And he is... well, as you can imagine, way more introverted than most of the people I know, and I think I know quite a few introverts, and extraordinarily thoughtful, and really has learned Warren Buffett's lessons in a way that is really special, Tillman, because I can, it's relatively easy to find me and put me in front of a camera. If you put Steve Wallman in front of a camera, I'll buy you a bottle of wine or something. But Steve is one of the most thoughtful investors that I know. And so I'm with him at the Berkshire meeting, and he talks about Apple. And we're talking about Apple, this must be about 2004 or 5. And he says, look, I've had this simple insight that Microsoft is all about text and words and doesn't handle images and video very well. And what I see with Apple is that they've really oriented their whole computing towards doing images and videos. And he said it's so obvious, and he pointed out some things at the time. It's so obvious that is where the world is going. And the whole Apple ecosystem is far better set up to take advantage of that. Computing is going to be visual. It's not going to be about BlackBerry keyboards. It's going to, and that made so much sense to me, and I did nothing about it. And I think that probably because he was the kind of guy who made big bets, small but big bets, or small number of big bets. I suspect he had at least 10 or more % of his portfolio, which was substantial, I think, at that point in Apple. And I think that, like Nick's sleep with Amazon, you only really need one. And you end up, Nick, you could say, had Amazon and Costco and probably a few others that we don't know about. But when you have one investment like that from, I don't know what the multiple is from 2005-6 in Apple, but it's probably at least 50, if not 100x. And so that was something and he's buy and hold investor. He would not have sold any of his Apple. And so that is something that I missed well before Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway invested in Apple. And I kind of part of my dismissal of the idea was, oh, that's nice, Steve, you understand these tech businesses. And the thing for me is that today it's Windows and tomorrow it's some other operating system, who knows? And I don't want to kind of bet on devices. I don't want to bet on software. And I couldn't see through that period how the Apple ecosystem was coming together in ways that kind of locked it in place in a very, very profound way. If you think of all the different aspects of Apple's businesses and the way that if you're on the Apple platform, everything just becomes a little bit easier. And, I remember going through the learning curve of discovering how simply being able to have your app on the Apple screen and then, to have your app integrate just a little bit better with the Apple OS. So then when Berkshire Hathaway revealed its position, so now I've done nothing with this incredible insight, and it's playing out. But I'm still stuck in this mindset of, oh yeah, but I don't do tech or something like that. And then Berkshire Hathaway goes and buys Apple. That was a difficult meeting for me, because I had to acknowledge that a whole bunch of things that I was holding in my mind as a kind of dogma had to be discarded. And Charlie Munger talks about discarding your best loved ideas. And so this was a case of me having to discard some of my best loved ideas. And I think that it's an enormous mistake of omission. And it's a mistake of omission that was sitting right there in front of me. And, I didn't do it when Steve Wallman talked about it. And I didn't do it when Warren Buffett talked about it. I think to some degree I kind of said I have a significant position in Berkshire. And I kind of said, well, Warren's doing that for me, which is a legitimate thing to do. But yeah, it's a huge mistake of omission. Actually, Monish's eyes practically popped out of his head when I told him, I think I'm going to be talking about one of your Turkish companies as a mistake of omission. Because if we talk about my desire not to invest in Turkey, what I'm being paid to do, what I need to do professionally is to evaluate things dispassionately and rationally. And I think that, on the one hand, you have these personal experiences around Turkey and kind of certain views about where Turkey is. Then on the other side, you have the fact that I have a front row seat into a specific selection of a specific company with a specific set of people. And there's nothing in the rule book that says I don't put 1 or 2% of my portfolio into it. And if I had put 1 or 2%, I think that company for Monish is 20x. So 1 or 2% could have turned into 20%, all other things being equal. So it's a missed opportunity, a significantly missed opportunity. I don't think I feel either about Apple or about this Turkish company. I don't think I feel that terrible about it because that's the nature of the world. We have to live in such a way that these opportunities are going to pass us by, and it's okay because we've done enough other things right, if you like. So
mistakes are always or often a chance to grow and to change things. What have you changed based on the mistake with Apple?
So I think that I can't start talking about my passwords to the general planet, but I think that when I do passwords, so they've become far longer. But if you, for example, on LastPass, which we use, you need to have a very long password so you could use a phrase, and I will use phrases as a kind of self-hypnosis. So use a phrase that is going to help me go in the right direction. And about 2020, 2021, I think I was forced to change my password, and I changed my password into something that would orient me towards thinking differently about these new economy companies. And rather than discarding them out of hand, and rather discarding an Apple or a Microsoft, to recognize that this is part of a very important part of our industrial economy that needs to be analyzed. And so, that's a very, very minor change, but from minor changes, you can get big changes. It's not like I jumped all over tech, but I think that I would be more open to investing in tech now. I probably still need to learn more lessons from that,
Maybe change your password again after I did the interview.
Well, I didn't talk about what the exact phrase was. So,
don't do this.
Yeah, maybe I will change the password because.
What is your password towards China? Here you have the question that's a bit challenging. I would say I bring you $1 million. You have to invest me this money in China. What would you do with them? But maybe you can also say it more about the password framework.
You mean if
I were to come today and do the experiment with you, you have $1 million, you can invest it for me in China. What would you do?
So, I don't speak Mandarin, and at this point in my life, I think it's unlikely that I will ever have a good grasp of Mandarin, and I haven't grown up in China. But I think that there are things that we can do, that I can do in countries that are not my home country, that can make sense. We can start with, which is not a strategy I particularly like, and is what Warren Buffett did in Korea, in which he invested in a basket of net nets. Famous case of him putting $100 million into a basket of net nets in Korea. So you can diversify in that way. I think that the investments that I've made successfully in countries that are not my home country, and for me, I consider home country, there's a Western Europe and North America and a few other mainly Anglo-Saxon economies like Australia and New Zealand, which I think operate in a very, very similar way. So when Berkshire Hathaway made the investment in PetroChina, I think that there's an analysis that you can do, that there are so many eyes on it, and there's so many interests that are deeply, that company is embedded in so many different institutions with so many eyes and interests there, that you can make predictions about how it will evolve, and concerns about corporate governance and concerns about expropriation or concerns about other kind of random things happening in that country can be attenuated. And I think that for the majority of them, the successful investments that I've made in non-home markets have had that kind of analysis that one can do around them. And to give one of the first ones for me was Crizzle, where there was a 40% shareholding from Standard & Poor's, and there was a 40% shareholding from ICICI Bank. And was I worried about minority expropriation? Yes, I was. But it wasn't one big institution versus a minority. It was two big institutions that were going to watch each other. So that's the kind of analysis that I'd be seeking to make in China. And I think that there are a number of businesses in China where one can relatively easily say, as one used to say about General Motors in the United States, what's good for General Motors is good for the United States. What's good for the United States is good for General Motors. You can say that same thing about those companies in China. What's good for China is good for Alibaba. What's good for Alibaba is good for China. And I would go even further to say, in the case of Alibaba, what is good for the world is good for Alibaba. And what's good for Alibaba is good for the world. And so I would look for those kinds of businesses where I, sitting from my perspective in Zurich, can make those kinds of inferences without having to get on the ground and get into detail that I will never really be able to evaluate properly.
You have this Jewish background, and in our pre-talk we talked about that your family had real estate in Berlin,
yeah.
And you got it back after the fall of the wall of Berlin, and you already went through with your family with this experience of property taken away, having to flee and stuff like this, which was really bad. How is this fear affecting your thoughts on China? Because there's always this thinking that in the end, what you're investing in China is for the Communist Party, the Chinese people, and it's maybe not for the outside investors.
Yeah, and before we get there, that story with my family's relationship to Germany is really special, I think, and I have gotten into huge trouble with my Israeli relatives by saying that I'm a proud German, and there are people who have problems with Wagner being played in Israel because they feel like Wagner was a big supporter of National Socialism, and I will take any opportunity to say that I am proud of. I think historically, when we look back at the post-war period, Germany will be held as an example of how a country can deal with its history. And I'm not saying that Germany was perfect. I think that when I look at the history of the Munich Games and the hostages that were taken, there are some very difficult questions to be answered about exactly what happened there. But in the overall, if all you have to do is go to Berlin and see that vast area of real estate that is given over to a memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe, to say, wow, this is a country that is, and the key is that, right now, Russia is going to have to do at some point in its history a similar job on itself for what is happening now in Ukraine and perhaps the actions of the Red Army after World War II that many historians say wasn't properly dealt with. This capacity of a country to carefully look over its history, we're being challenged to do that in the West over slavery. And, and there's a very high standard that is set by Germany. So I would also say that it's an unfortunate fact of history that people do get expropriated. People do have to move for all sorts of reasons. And by the way, if you go back to previous generations of my family on my mother's side, they were economic migrants. They weren't expropriated en masse as an ethnic group, but they moved for economic opportunity and because there was nothing for them in the country that they left. So, after a generation or two, you have to get over it. But I think that so that happened and I think that what's really important, and I really do believe this, and just to go to a discussion that we were having in the office the other day. So and to bring it back a little bit to investing. So what happened in Germany could have happened in any country. I strongly believe that. All these people who say, well, there's something unique in the German mindset or spirit, I disagree with that. Humans are capable of extraordinary cruelty and destruction. It's nothing to do with whether you speak the German language or the English language or any other language under the sun. If you look at what happened in Algeria under the French, you can see terrible things. And so we always have to kind of arm ourselves as humans against our capacity for terrible evil. And sitting in the famous charity lunch with Warren Buffett, I will never forget these words. He said, we were talking about debt, and he said, I don't want to get into a lot of debt ever because I don't want to discover what I'm capable of. I don't remember whether I said it, but in remembering it, what I would have wanted to have said is, are you serious, Warren? Are you telling that you, one of the most respected business people, not just on the planet, but who's ever lived, you're saying that you're worried about what you're capable of? But that is a signal lesson. When we look at Sam Bankman-Fried, or there are comparisons being made between him and Bernie Madoff, the correct thing to do is not to say, those evil people, I could never have done that. The correct thing to say is, that is what a human is capable of, and I, sharing the same humanity as that person, am capable of that for myself. How do I make sure that I never do that, that never happens to me? You don't want to say, those evil people, look what they did. Say, I'm capable of the same evil. How do I make sure that it never happens to me or around me? So that's a long story. And that's the right approach to the history of Germany in World War II.